Zon'ozz may be the King Kong of ping pong, but we're about to bounce this guy straight back to where he came from. On heroic mode, Zon'ozz is still a two-phase repeating fight. Phase 1 is all about execution, while Phase 2 is an intense burn, healing, and add phase. The boss himself has around 256 million HP, and throughout the fight he will spawn flail, eye, and claw adds. These have around 390,000, 1 million, and 2.3 million HP respectively. You'll want to bring 2 tanks, 6 to 7 healers, and a balanced mix of DPS. To properly execute the strategy used in this video, you'll need to bring classes and specs that can properly soak the orb by themselves. This should not hinder the raid composition too much, but do keep this in mind. Like all of our other heroic videos, this video will assume that you've done the fight on the normal difficulty and are familiar with the normal spells and tactics. For more in-depth coverage of the fight as a whole, please see our normal mode strategy guide. Zon'ozz himself has no new spells on heroic, but some of his spells behave a bit differently. For starters, Dispelling Disrupting Shadows will knock back all players near the target as well as the player themselves. Beyond that, the biggest difference will be seen in Phase 2. Instead of a simple burn phase as is the case on normal mode, your raid will instead have to contend with an intense add phase. During Phase 2, Zon'ozz will spawn multiple eye and flail adds, as well as 2 much larger claw adds. These will deal stacking raid damage to all players that decreases as they are killed off. The quantity of adds and their health makes them difficult to kill off in the allotted time, which will cause the phase to feel very frantic. Let's look at how you'll handle the upgraded Zon'ozz. Thankfully, Phase 1 positioning on heroic is much easier than normal. There are 2 fundamental differences between the strats that allows this. The first is that players will no longer be dispelling Disrupting Shadows. Instead, healers will simply heal through the damage of the debuff and wait while it falls off of players. The second is that the soaking will not be done between a ranged group and a melee group, but instead between the entire raid and a solo player standing at range. This means that the entire raid will begin the fight stacked directly behind the boss, and with the exception of individual players running out of the group and back to soak the orb, the raid will remain in one group until Phase 2 begins. The healing will be very easy to do since the raid is stacked up. Healers can freely use their AoE spells and ground effects. Just make sure not to dispel anybody. Dispelling the debuff will cause all players to be knocked back, and it is much easier to simply heal through it than worry about positioning around it. The more important part of Phase 1 will be about the soaking. Because of the immense damage that the orb does, few classes can soak the orb solo, and due to those classes' cooldowns, they will need to rotate turns doing this. The basic premise works as such. The orb spawns out at range. A single player hits it and it bounces back towards the boss. The whole raid soaks the hit and it bounces back out toward the outside. A single player, the next one in the rotation, hits it and it bounces back toward the boss. Again, the raid soaks the hit and it bounces back out toward the outside. This repeats usually with 4 to 6 soakers until the raid is ready to transition into Phase 2. The classes we feel are most viable for soaking are mages with cauterize, rogues with cheat death, and shadow priests with dispersion. All of these spells or talents will allow the player to survive soaking an orb solo, but due to the long cooldowns, they will need to rotate throughout each Phase 1. For example, during the first Phase 1, you may opt to have a mage soak the first bounce, a rogue soak the second, a shadow priest on the third, and a second mage on the fourth. There are a few ways to set this up, but make sure the rotating player knows the order before the fight. It helps if they are vocal about calling out who is next. When it is time for the orb to hit the boss, have players run to their Phase 2 positions. When done properly, this will easily leave enough room for the orb to collide with the Zon'ozz, beginning the second phase of the fight. Phase 2 is drastically different than normal difficulty. Multiple adds will spawn in a circle around the area while 2 larger adds will spawn in the pool area. Each of the adds contributes to the raid damage in this phase, so the faster these adds are killed, the quicker the damage will decrease. What makes the phase even more difficult is the necessity to run around the room in order to kill the adds while maintaining the needed amount of healing. There are a few ways to do this, but let's begin with the big adds in the middle. 2 large claw adds will spawn, and a tank will need to pick up each. These only have around 2 million HP and do not hit incredibly hard, but still need to be tanked. Assign one healer to each tank and have them focus primarily on keeping their tank alive. The rest of the raid will be split into 2 groups tasked with clearing the ads on their half of the circle. Make sure each group has an even split of melee, range, and healers, and assign each group to a different opposing starting point on the circle. The idea is that as Phase 2 begins, each group will position at their point in the circle and run around the circle, killing all ads that they come across. The ads will always spawn in the same spot, so it is easy to prepare for them. Don't hesitate to blow DPS, healing, and raid cooldowns during this phase, since the healing can be quite intense. Remember that as the ads are killed, the raid damage will decrease. The boss will reactivate shortly into Phase 2, but make sure to continue killing the ads. Do not return to the boss until all of the ads have been defeated. Once the ads are down, players should return to Phase 1 positions and repeat the fight once again. Phase 1 is really quite simple on Heroic, but Phase 2 can be frantic and difficult to control. If your raid is having trouble doing Phase 2 successfully, try just practicing it without Phase 1. Begin the fight and bounce the first orb straight into the boss. This will start Phase 2 instantly and let your raid focus on it with a clear head. The more players see Phase 2, the easier it will become. Don't get overwhelmed too quickly. If you enjoyed this guide or found it helpful, bookmark us at LearntoRaid.com, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitch TV and Twitter. As always, we hope this guide was helpful, and we'll see you at the next boss.
I wasn't feeling so good. I just didn't feel like playing anymore. So I went home, and I got all comfy and cozy and all scrunched up in front of my phonograph. And I sat there and I closed